Believe it or not, this is actually a very serious Zelda theory. It ties into the deep lore of The Legend of Zelda, the history of Hyrule. It talks about bloodlines and lineages, which is a very family-friendly way of saying it's about the history of just how freaky those fish got in The Legend of Zelda. Because Zoras, yeah, they like to get around. Last warning for those who don't want spoilers, because I'm going to be talking about both the Zoras and their descendants, the Rito. That's right, players who joined the Zelda fandom during Breath of the Wild might not know this, but the Rito only appeared in a single game prior to the Breath of the Wild. That, of course, was Zelda the Wind Waker, my favorite Zelda game, and in that game, the Zoras are absent. And it's during the events of the main story that we learn that the Zoras evolved from the Rito. Except, is that something we learn? It's not explicitly stated in the game, but it is implied through the character of Rito, an ancient sage of the earth, sharing a blood connection with the Rito girl Medley. In this game, the Rito are a little different to how they appear in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. They acquire their power of flight by praying to the sky spirit Velu, who seems to bestow this power to them. And their wings do look a lot like the Zora's arm fins. Finally, the Kokiri from Ocarina of Time are also absent in the Wind Waker and have evolved very clearly into a different form, the Koroks, the children of the Great Deku Tree. So then it's a pretty safe assumption that the Zora who have disappeared from the world of Hyrule evolved in Wind Waker into the Rito to escape the Great Flood. Except I don't think this is the case, and I think actually Tears of the Kingdom not only disproves this, but maybe even retcons it entirely. Because in Tears of the Kingdom we see memories of the time of ancient Hyrule, a time just after the kingdom's founding. This time is possibly just after Skyward Sword, though I think probably just before. No matter the case, it's certainly before Wind Waker. The Ritos existed before Zelda the Wind Waker, before the Zora could evolve into them. No matter how you use the Master Sword or slice up the timeline of the canon, a Rito champion existed alongside the Zora since the beginning of Hyrule. But then, is this a retcon, and what's this got to do with Rito being Medley's ancestor? There's something fishy going on here. But I think the answer is pretty simple. The Rito is Medley's ancestor. They do share a blood connection. That much is stated as fact in the game. It's just not the case that the whole Zora race evolved into the Rito race, but rather that this specific Rito shares a blood connection with a fish from the times of the ancient past. See, when people think of evolution, you likely think of like Pokemon, evolving from one stage, one form into another. But if you've seen my Tree of Evolution series over on my Pokemon channel, then you'll know that it's not quite like that. It's a process that happens very slowly over hundreds of thousands of years, with species who look kind of similar slowly diverging from one another. All of them sharing common ancestry a long time back. Large changes happening quickly, that's not evolution, that's magic. Which makes sense for the forest spirits, the Kokiri becoming the Koroks, but for the Rito, the answer is just simple. Once upon a time, a Rito daddy and a Zora mummy loved each other very much, or at least found each other to be a good laugh for a weekend. Anyway, what that means is that Laruto's child was half Zora and half Rito. Half fish, half bird? Is that a new species? But no, because the Rito and Zora aren't different species. Zelda doesn't use the term species to describe the various, well, races that appear across its franchise. Canonically, it uses that word. Races, the Goron race, the Rito race, the Zora race, as if they're all part of some larger group. The various denizens of Hyrule, these races, all evolved likely from a common ancestor a long time ago. Despite their various forms and very pleasant shapes, there's no taboo here. The Gerudo come into Hyrule to meet men who they call Vo to reproduce. Ross is a character in A Link Between Worlds who, while is officially Hyrulean, looks very Goron-like and wears the emblem of the Goron people on his belt. Yeah, this guy's dad is a Goron. And the Zoras aren't one to judge. Throughout the series, they take so many different forms, including the River Zora and the Zola, and King Zoras typically look, well, they've definitely got something else going on. Additionally, in Ocarina of Time, Rito is just totally happy to accept and wants to have Link as her fiancé, and she understands the implications well into adulthood, where she continues to refer to him as so. And Mipha and Link, of course, in Breath of the Wild, share a romance. Mom, I got a new partner, and it's not a Zora, it's a Hylian. They're a Hylian.
That's okay, honey. Zora, Rito, Hylian, I don't care, as long as it's not one of those filthy River Zora.
The Rito people never evolved from the Zoras. The Rito people have existed since the beginning of Hyrule. That's just something that we implied as children when playing Wind Waker for the first time, because we maybe didn't understand the implications of a fish person and a bird person getting it on. Now, I know some of you are skeptically minded, and like me, some of you are just degenerates, and you're thinking about the anatomy of all this and how this can possibly work, but this very game, Tears of the Kingdom, confirms that it can work, because you have King Rauru and Queen Sonia, who are of different races of Hyrule, and yet they have a child, because Zelda is part of their bloodline, which means their lineage is passing on, which means the reproduction is happening absolutely fine. So get your mind out of the gutter. Yes, Medli is Naruto's descendant, but that's not a species-wide occurrence. Now, I'd be remiss to not at least mention that there is a bit of text in 1 or 2 pages of the Zelda Encyclopedia that does use the word evolution, suggesting that the Zora had to become the Rito after Wind Waker because of a magical sea, this great sea being illusionary. But firstly, an illusionary sea? It acts like water, you can swim in it, you can drown in it, it's very much a sea. In fact, in Breath of the Wild, salt rock can be found everywhere, suggesting there was once a great ocean where Hyrule now stands. But secondly, I just don't think I can count these few passages in the Zelda Encyclopedia more canon than the now appearance of an ancient Rito people from the time of Hyrule's founding in Tears of the Kingdom. But there's more in Tears of the Kingdom, the nail in the coffin, and that is the Temple of Winds. The Temple of the Rito people. It's a ship. Specifically, an ark that the Rito people describe as having saved the Ritos in an ancient time. An ark that saved their race in ancient times. Now, think of the most famous ark you can think of. For what purpose did it exist? Oh yeah, to save the many species of the world during a great flood. Yes, the Great Sea from the Wind Waker. That is the purpose for which the Wind Temple exists, to help the Rito people who already existed in Hyrule, perhaps in other varying countries of the Zelda world. Remember, there are Librina and Holdrum and Termina, other places where the Rito may have been in hiding throughout the Zelda timeline, but sure enough, they've existed for the longest time. And this ark helped them during the time of the Great Flood, bringing them all the way over to Death Mountain, which became known as Dragon Roost. Now, the observant among you are going to say, but hang on, no, the Great Sea, there's no Zora there, and also what about the grappling hook, the item that Medli gives you, and she explains that the Rito people used it before the Rito people evolved wings. Well, of course, the Rito had to evolve wings at some point in history, and so presumably it's an item from that time, since before the cutscenes that we see in Tears of the Kingdom. Or alternatively, it could be the case that something's happening in the time of the Wind Waker as a result of Ganon's curse of the island. Perhaps the Ritos have simply been losing their ability of flight. Or perhaps before the flooding started, the Ritos were already losing their power of flight, and this is why the Ark, the Stormwind Ark, which is a winged flying ark, was useful both as something that could raise them into the sky and keep them above the sea. There are so many ways you can explain all this. Oh, and actually, the lack of Zora people kind of ties into this. When Ganon returned into the world shortly before the Great Flood, it's possible that Ganon wiped out the Zora in Hyrule. Don't worry, again, there are Zora in other countries like Termina, Holdrum, and Librina. So, with a lack of other available options, Naruto, the Earth Sage, ended up shacking up with a Rito fella to pass on her bloodline to Medli. But the Rito, they've always existed, right back to the days of Hyrule's founding at the beginning of the timeline. Now I just need to work out how it works with the egg laying, because we know Zoras lay eggs and have tadpoles. Maybe that's just in Zora to Zora relations. Anyway, I hope you're enjoying Tears of the Kingdom as much as I am, and thank you. If you enjoyed this video, please do subscribe for more Zelda theories. This is a new growing channel, so it really needs all the love it can get. Thank you. Talk about the Triforce, one of the most iconic images in all of gaming. Where is it in Tears of the Kingdom? This mystery isn't new for Tears of the Kingdom. The prequel, Breath of the Wild, that also didn't feature the Triforce very predominantly, and there are a number of videos on YouTube covering this topic. Where might the Triforce have been? Both as the relic that is a physical manifestation of 3 golden triangles, from which someone who possesses all 3 physical pieces can be granted their heart's desire before the golden triangles return to the sacred realm. Or where was the Triforce as in its normally metaphysical state, where it exists within Triforce wielders Link, Ganondorf, and Zelda, the Triforces of courage, power, and wisdom respectively. They exist within these people and can be drawn out into the physical form, and these pieces of the Triforce are awakened or earned or perhaps even gifted by the gods themselves. There's a couple of different bits of lore you can look at. But in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, the Triforce is completely absent. Or is it? I've decided that the Triforce was hidden in plain sight all along, and it's actually very present in Tears of the Kingdom. First of all, let's just have a quick look at the arguments for Breath of the Wild. Where was the Triforce? We see it on the depiction of the ancient calamity being used by the Zelda of the time to fight off the calamity 10,000 years ago. But much like any of the elements of legend, is it really there? We don't know. Or was it just seen being projected from the Zelda of that age, much like Zelda at the very end of the game, who holds out her hand and uses her great sealing power to destroy the Calamity Ganon. We see this representation of the Triforce come out from her hand, but it's all three triangles. Does Zelda possess the three Triforce triangles? Is she awakening the Triforce of Wisdom within herself? Or is this just a symbol, much like how Triforce symbols appear all over the Zelda world in relation to magic? Again, see the Wind Waker, where we see the Tower of Gods rising from the ocean. It's hard to say. Possibly the Triforce of Wisdom is awakening from within her. If so, what does that mean for the Triforces of Power and Courage? Well, if this moment at the end of Breath of the Wild is the Triforce of Wisdom awakening within Zelda, then possibly the Triforce of Power is awakening within Ganondorf down below Hyrule Castle, allowing for the seal to finally be weak enough for him to escape, much like how Ganondorf escaped execution at the end of Twilight Princess. If so, this means the Triforce of Courage is also going to be awakening within Link, possibly. This doesn't have a lot of evidence, but it does explain something we see at the end of the game, where when Ganon is being destroyed, a bright golden light escapes from within his mouth. He can finally be destroyed because perhaps the Triforce of Power that was within him is leaving. Similarly, it is this very same sacred power that Zelda is described by Sonya to have to be possessing, which is allowing the Master Sword to heal over the course of the game, is being used and then by Link to help heal Zelda from her dragon form and restore her to her original being. That's what the golden light emanating from his hand is. His hand, of course, usually being the place where you see the Triforce. This is all very wishy-washy and vague, and exactly what you'd expect from an absurd Zelda theory, but I want to give you something else to subscribe for, something that I think is actually more likely. See, there are a lot of people that believe that Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild are in fact a completely separate continuity to the rest of Legend of Zelda, or that the rest of Legend of Zelda exists as a sort of mythos, with legends being described about the three golden triangles. Its imagery can be seen all over Hyrule, but did any of that stuff really happen? If it didn't, then this imagery of the three golden triangles that belonged to the goddesses had to come from somewhere in history. And sure enough, if we look to the ancient past of the days of Hyrule's founding, we can see on the clothing of the Zonai, including of course Rauru, golden triangles everywhere. The Triforce was something that the Zonai knew about, but then what happened to it? Well, the answer is staring us in the face. The Triforce was broken up due to its power into shards, and these secret stones are the Tears of the Kingdom. Within the continuity of just Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, the Triforce is gone, and now there are these Tears of the Kingdom, secret Zonai stones that belonged to creatures that are described to be godlike. Godlike because of the power that these stones provide them. They enhance the powers of the people that use them, much like the Triforce of Wisdom is a reflection of Zelda's wisdom, or power, Ganondorf's power. And Triforce shards is something we've seen dating back to the original Legend of Zelda, but again, most prominently in the Wind Waker. The idea of splitting up the golden triangle because it is simply too powerful. It exists then in the state of the 10 spiritual stones. And I know what you're thinking, this is really getting absurd. 10 secret stones? Toby, there is only ever 7 at one time. 8 if you include Raru's that exists twice at the same point in time, thanks to the time travel shenanigans. But no, I believe there are 10. Because one of the things that we know about the secret stone is to swallow such incredible power, to digest it, is to become an immortal dragon. We see this, of course, happening in the game to both Ganondorf and Zelda, and the ritual is described to Zelda by Minoru as being strictly forbidden, but she's familiar with it. It must be something they've done before. The way she talks about it, it is forbidden because it has happened in the past. I believe this finally explains the origins of Farush, Naedra, and Dinrol, the other 3 legendary and perhaps immortal dragons. These 3 dragons, named after the golden goddesses Din, Nehru, and Faeror, were in fact once people, members of the Zonai tribe, the Zonai race, or perhaps even Hyruleans, who took upon themselves a sacred duty to stop the power of the triangles getting into the wrong hand. The triangles were instead fashioned into the secret stones of the Zonai, the Tears of the Kingdom, and then To keep them safe, many were kept with the Zonai in this ancient kind of lock-up area that's behind the goddess statue, but 3 of them were digested by people in a forbidden ritual to keep those parts of the Triforce out of the hands of those who might seek to use its power for evil. So, 3 brave heroes took it upon themselves to swallow one of the secret tears. They became named after the gods themselves, and perhaps the springs were made in their honor. What's also really interesting here is that Tears of the Kingdom introduces us to 3 new armor sets. The Charged, Ember, and Frostbite armors are all ritualistic looking in design and evoke the imagery of the dragons that represent the elements of thunder, fire, and ice. For the Charged set in particular, which features a larger role in the story of Tears of the Kingdom, the Zonai ruins around the Spring of Courage where you find this armor set are depicted with tall dragons. The rooms of those ruins having large circles engraved into the ceiling of what was once there, much like the Zonai shrines that cover the map. Additionally, nearby to both the Spring of Courage and Wisdom, you can actually find powerful Zonai constructs defending them, as if these were locations of great sacred Zonai rituals in the past. And additionally, when we look to the room where Rauru gave the secret stones to the sages, we see the depictions of dragons absolutely everywhere, suggesting that the transformation of these dragons is not only tied to these secret stones, but also predates it. The dragons being depicted all over Zonai architecture are these dragons. They are Dinrol, Farosh, and Nadra. 3 heroes of the ancient past who defend the power of the Triforce from falling into the hands of evil, because part of the Triforce is within themselves. The rest of the secret stones having just a fraction of the power that they would have if combined together into the Triforce. This also ties into Ganondorf's wanting of the spiritual stone, because it is something that we've seen time and time again throughout the series, as he often goes for the Triforce. If this is the case, that the 10 Tears of the Kingdom are 10 separate shards of the Triforce that have been broken into pieces over the years, then it means that the power that Zelda is using at the end of Breath of the Wild, and perhaps even during the Great Calamity 10,000 years ago, is not the Triforce directly. But it is possible that she, and only she, is able to connect to that power. First of all, in Breath of the Wild, to awaken her power, she has to make pilgrimages to the various springs to connect to the dragons, who again have that power within them. They're lending her the power. But furthermore, throughout the entirety of the story of Breath of the Wild, and before that even during the time of the Great Calamity, there is a piece of the Triforce inside another version of her, flying high in the sky over Hyrule. Perhaps it is this that she's able to resonate with to stop the Calamity Ganon. Or perhaps this is just another absurd Zelda theory. Again, if you've not subscribed, please do consider subscribing. It's amazing to see this channel growing, and just thank you so much. I'm super excited. I think we're going to hit 10,000 subscribers. Everyone, you're so amazing. More absurd Zelda theories coming soon. Let me know your thoughts in the comment, and please share around. So, Tears of the Kingdom is set a few years after Breath of the Wild. We're not 100% sure on a specific date. Ruji and Chulin have both aged up since games prior, and so too has Pura, though she's a bad judge of this, as she's actually older than Lady Impa, thanks to her aging technology, or de-aging technology, so she's not much to go on. Technology is absolutely wild in the way that it works, and some of the most incredible technology that appears in this medieval setting is that of the Sheikah Shrines, and of course, the Guardians. Built over 10,000 years ago, the Shrines, Sheikah Towers, and of course the Guardians, their presence can be felt all across Hyrule in Breath of the Wild. One of the biggest and most notable changes so far in my playthrough of Tears of the Kingdom is that I haven't encountered a single one. The shrines are gone, replaced of course with the new shrines, and the Sheikah Towers have disappeared, replaced with the Skyview Towers. I'm definitely hopeful there's a base or a dungeon of them somewhere out there in the world, like they've all been put into storage, and I'm going to walk into this storage locker and be attacked by a million blinking eyes, but I digress. But it seems like they're all gone, and so too are the aforementioned Sheikah Shrines. Now, these were created underground across Hyrule to test the hero of Monday. They were guarded by Sheikahs who went through some kind of self-mummification process. They're barely alive in there, leaving behind spirit orbs to help the hero when they leave this realm, when the hero passes their challenge. Link can then use these spirit orbs at goddess statues to gain stamina wheels and hearts, which he starts Tears of the Kingdom with all of those complete, meaning that this is set canonically in a world where Link did in fact do all the shrines. I personally did not. Just seems like a lot of work. There's a lot of shrines. So if these shrines were still in Hyrule, canonically, they would be big, empty rooms with completed puzzles in and no Sheikah left to guard them. Instead, of course, they've been replaced with the Zonai shrines, though these aren't one-to-one. They're not in the same locations. And rather than being underground, they are above ground usually, and typically they seem to be portals to worlds contained within them, like walking into a TARDIS. Speaking of underground, though, that is where our story in Tears of the Kingdom starts, with Link and Zelda investigating the depths below Hyrule Castle. From there, gloom has been emanating up. And gloom is this game's version of malice. It seems to be a weaker, less dense version of the substance that created the Calamity Ganon of Breath of the Wild. Even the Calamity itself is barely referenced, but it is mentioned, so the continuity is the same. In fact, when we go to Hateno Village in Link's old house, we see it's actually become Zelda's old house. And Zelda has a diary where she talks about the ways in which she wants to improve Hyrule after the Calamity. The Calamity, by the way, has spanned over 100 years. Zelda knows the Calamity all too well because she is out of time herself, misplaced from 100 years prior where she was originally born. There she saw Link fall at the Hateno Fort and saw as the world succumbed to Ganon's malice. So what's the story here, and what happened to the Sheikah Shrines and of course the Guardians? Well, I believe a couple of years after the events of Breath of the Wild, when the gloom started to emanate up from underneath the castle, Zelda recognized the threat that this could become. It starts now as gloom, but of course it could transform into malice. This could be the beginning of another calamity. Yes, they've destroyed the Calamity Ganon above ground, but the source of that power seems to be underneath the castle. And this power is strong. It was just 100 years ago that this malice, this power of Ganondorf's, infected the various Sheikah Guardians built and designed to protect Hyrule and even the divine beasts, and turned them against their creators. Within those divine beasts, the greatest of these guardians, his concentrated malice in the forms of the Blight Ganons, executed the various leaders of Hyrule. So my theory here is simple. Knowing the threat that malice poses to the Sheikah technology, the shrines were dismantled, so too with the Sheikah towers. The guardians and divine beasts deconstructed, not put in the earth to be later summoned again by a later Ganondorf or anything like that, but instead entirely torn apart. There are still a few little innocuous bits of Sheikah technology around the Hateno lab, for example. There, Robbie is using the technology to help with portaling, and of course it can most prominently be seen in the Skyview Towers. There we can see the arms of Guardians, initially quite scary in the first cutscene, being used for a very gentle purpose. I say gentle, to fling Link up into the sky. But no longer does the technology belong to potential death machines. That would be far too dangerous with the gloom appearing. Zelda had these machines ripped apart so that they couldn't pose a threat to the people of Hyrule. The shrines and towers, unable to be used by the forces of evil, as her and her chosen hero Link go to investigate the source of this gloom. And that, of course, is where the game begins. There is one little tidbit that ties into this with the Sheikah technology, and again, we're just going to move slightly further into the spoiler territory, but again, it's really not a big deal. Throughout the story, we do see the ancestors of the champions, the heroes of today. These ancient sages of the various races wear masks, which, of course, look a lot like the divine beasts of today. You can actually obtain masks that match these ones by using the champion amiibos, or at least that's how I got them. I don't know whether they're available in any other way in the game. And when you wear yours, say you wear the Varuta mask, your associated champion spirit that walks alongside you will wear the mask of the ancient sage. I believe this is implying, of course, a connection between the divine beasts and these masks, and I think it's possible that these 4 unnamed sages throughout the game from the ancient past are simply called Varuta, Vamedo, Varodania, and Vanaboris, or maybe perhaps Ruta, Meadow, Rudania, and Naboris. And it's actually where the descendants Ruto, Medli, Darunia, and Naburo, I definitely didn't pronounce that right, Naburu get their names. But perhaps I missed something in Tears of the Kingdom, and if I did, I do want to know about it in the comment section. By the way, thank you for supporting this growing Zelda Theory channel. You are part of an up-and-coming thing. In my first video to get over 100,000 views on this channel, thank you so much. I did a video on where are the Guardians in Tears of the Kingdom, and by the way, we found one. There's one on the top of the Hateno Tech Lab. Thank you for letting me know in the comments. You also will let me know in the comments about how wrong I was about the comment about gloom being a weaker form of malice. I wanted to talk about that a little bit more, and you can continue to tell me how wrong you think think I am in the comments down below. This should be a pretty quick one. So first of all, gloom and malice. They are the two substances that appear to be related to Ganon or Ganondorf in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. For the sake of this video, they are the same thing. Heck, for the sake of the canon, they're effectively the same thing. I think in Tears of the Kingdom, malice is basically never mentioned, if at all. Both emanate from under Hyrule Castle. Both can be kind of formed into monsters, either both directly from the substance or in the form of like the bokoblins, which when they die kind of burst into a purple mist, which reflects that of malice. Yeah, I think it's safe to say that these two substances are basically just the same thing, just expressing itself a little bit differently, and by expressing itself in different quantities. So am I wrong that gloom is weaker than malice? Well, technically yes, because they're the same thing. It's just different versions of the same thing. But you might think, no, there is a distinguishing difference between gloom and malice. Hang on. Gloom is red and malice is a sort of pinky purple color. Except I don't think this is a difference of the two different substances so much as it is just a difference of time and perhaps exposure to the air, or possibly even sunlight. We know that when you stand in malice in Tears of the Kingdom, you do lose your hearts, which is why so many people said to me, Toby, gloom is like so much stronger than malice, except you get your hearts back the moment you stand in sunlight. But what about Link losing his arm and all his hearts at the beginning of Tears of the Kingdom? We'll get to that. The point is, there's something about this substance that doesn't do well with sunlight, which is why it's so prevalent in the depths of Hyrule. It's only recently on the surface as the result of the upheaval. Before that, it was only able to appear on the surface in the form of this kind of gas that was making people feel ill. So my take is that just after this substance has been on the surface for a while, it takes a more pinky purpley hue, and we can actually sort of see that with the Gorons in Tears of the Kingdom, who eat the marbled rock that's been infected with this with the gloom, and then their eyes turn pinky purple as a result of consuming it. So with that said, I'm going to run through the weakest form of this substance to the strongest form of this substance, starting with gloom the gas. This appears at the beginning of Tears of the Kingdom. Zelda and Link are going to investigate it because it's been making people not feel well. It's been coming from the bottom of Hyrule Castle and emanating up through to the surface world. It and all of its variations that I'm about to talk about have been coming from the same source, which of course is Ganondorf underground. This, when Ganondorf wakes up, is when the upheaval happens, and now this gloop form of gloom appears all over the surface of Hyrule. It's also pretty prevalent in the depths. I imagine it's been down there for a while, but out of sunlight it keeps that strong red color. On the surface, it also has that strong red color, but only because it's only recently been there. It hasn't been in this concentration for long yet. It's especially prevalent on the outside of the chasms, and if you stand in it, you'll lose your hearts at a slow pace, but the moment you step back out, you'll get your heart containers back, and there's even clothing and food that can provide you with resistance to the substance. However, should the substance be allowed to build up over time, left out in the sunlight, the red turns to a more pinky purple hue. It becomes malice, which if you stand in, you lose your heart containers at a much faster rate than you did with gloom. From both substances, creatures can form. The Phantom Ganon, the hands, oh my goodness, the hands are like the scariest enemy in all of Zelda. And also when it comes to malice, there's the eyes. But when it comes to the malice form, the more concentrated form, it ultimately can turn into the Blight Ganons or even the Calamity Ganon himself. Be made out of this substance. It has been allowed to build up, and while no, it doesn't remove heart containers, which ultimately can be restored in the form of gloom, it does eliminate your health incredibly quickly, and it threatens the lives of Hyruleans directly in the form of the Calamity Ganon manifest. But I know what you're going to say, absurd Zelda theories. What about the attack from Ganondorf at the beginning of Tears of the Kingdom that wipes out Link's hearts completely, removing those containers in a way where they cannot come back without him finding new heart containers? It even decays his arm and the Master Sword and threatens his life if it wasn't for Raru's arm. And to that I say, yeah, this is the most concentrated we've ever seen the substance. But I wouldn't call that gloom in the same way I'd call the wispy gas version gloom. I wouldn't necessarily call it malice either. It shares qualities of both. It's got the reddish hue because it's fresh. It's come from Ganondorf himself very directly and very immediately. However, it's got the consistency of the Calamity Ganon. It's got the consistency and thickness of malice, being blasted directly at the hero at close range from the source. This is the most powerful we've ever seen it used. This form of the substance is so powerful it causes the whole upheaval to happen. So I believe this is it in its most raw and pure form. In this way, is gloom weaker than malice? Well, if you're calling the wispy gas that makes people feel a little bit ill, yes. But if you're talking about this version that comes straight from the Demon King himself, then no. And is one stronger than the other generally? Not really, they're the same thing. Anyway, don't forget to let me know how wrong I am in the comments down below, and I'll see you with a new video soon. I was going to chuck up the pre-story to Zelda Tears of the Kingdom and talk about how all of the flashbacks and scenes that we see in the teardrop memories, how they are contradictory to what we know about the founding years of Hyrule as seen in Skyward Sword, the first game in the timeline. The Zelda timeline has always been confusing, but actually even more so now. We have Ganondorf turning into the Demon King, accessing that form. However, didn't Demise set the curse that set off Ganondorf? If that's true, that means that, of course, the events of Skyward Sword happen before the pre-story of Tears of the Kingdom. But hang on, in Tears of the Kingdom, Rauru is the last of the Zonai, and Queen Sonia talks about how Zelda seems to share some kind of blood connection with them, suggesting that they are, of course, ancestors. And that would make sense, because Zelda's father in Skyward Sword is Gaebora, and Gabora is the name of the owl in Ocarina of Time that is the owl form of Rauru, the Sage of Light, suggesting that Rauru in Tears of the Kingdom is the ancestor to Zelda, but that would mean that the pre-story of Tears of the Kingdom happens before Skyward Sword. It all gets very confusing. There are a number of ways, and I encourage you in the comments down below, of course, to rectify these various canonical points. And again, I remind everyone that this is The Legend of Zelda, and this channel is Absurd Zelda Theories. But I've got a theory, an order of events that I think explains perfectly both Skyward Sword and most of it all still being canon, with nothing being retconned in particular, and the pre-story to Tears of the Kingdom still making sense. So here we go. Let me run through the origin story of Hyrule. At the very beginning, there was nothing. A swirling vortex of chaos. We see this on Ocarina of Time as the Great Deku Tree describes to Link about the three golden goddesses, Nehru, Faeror, and Din. They create life and spirit, they create the earth. In terms of life, they perhaps create a form of biological life that reproduces, with Goron, Zora, Rito, and Hylians and Gerudo all stemming from the same place. But above them all, there is a race closer to the gods than any other. Some sort of, you could consider them small gods, like little g small gods. These are a species known as the Zonai. They're closer to the gods than the Hylians. And the Zonai aren't power hungry. They are already micro gods themselves, so they have everything they need. It is my belief that over thousands of years they foster the species of Hyrule, helping them with their incredible technology. They have technology that allows their islands to reside in the sky while they watch from above. They have technology that is anti-gravity and can even manipulate time itself. It is they who have had bestowed upon them the Tears of the Kingdom, as well as possibly the Triforce. It seems likely that King Rauru will know where the Triforce is sealed away. But I digress. Over thousands and thousands of years, the races of Hyrule evolve and change. I mentioned in my Zora video how the races of Hyrule are just that, they're races. They're not different species, which means they can reproduce with one another. And this is demonstrated right here with the Zonai, who slowly but surely begin to just die out, with Rauru and Minoru being considered the last of their kind. So in this final time of the Zonai, thousands of years already into our story, takes a Hylian wife known as Sonia. Sonia is a word, by the way, that means wisdom, which instantly gives her a connection to Zelda, and she mentions when she meets Zelda for the first time that Zelda shares a blood connection. She is a descendant of theirs, meaning that Rauru and Sonia have a child that we don't see in Tears of the Kingdom. They must do to allow for all future Zeldas to be born. At this time, the various races of Hyrule's already have customs that have been repeating for generations. Every 100 years, a male is born into the Gerudo, and when that happens, that male is given kingly status, given the kingdom by birthright. This, in this time, of course, is Ganondorf. And Rauru, with his Hylian wife and the work of the Zonai mostly complete, decides it's time to unify the races and creates the kingdom of Hyrule. Goron's Rito, Zora, and Gerudo are attempted to be brought into the fold, but the Gerudo don't follow suit as easy as the others. Ganondorf pretends to be loyal, but sees the power that the Zonai have hidden. If only Ganondorf could have that power for himself, for his people. It seems likely that even he and the ancient Gerudo sage were in disagreement about the future of the kingdom. At this time, future Zelda appears from Tears of the Kingdom and warns of an evil in the future, warns of Ganondorf, and Rauru recognizes the threat that Ganondorf is. He has evil in his heart and desire in his eyes, and with it he makes moves and kills Queen Sonia. He takes her tear and transforms. He becomes the Demon King. Now, the observant among you may have recognized that I haven't yet mentioned Demise, and that's because I don't think Demise actually exists yet. I'm going to get to that, and I promise you it's going to make sense. At the very minimum, this channel is called Absurd Zelda Theories. You know why you subscribed. It is this Demon King who brings Moblin and Hinox and Lynels into the world. It is this Demon King that begins to terrorize Hyrule for the first time. And Rauru knows what he must do. Rauru places a seal on this Demon King, locking him away, but the Demon King knows, as does Rauru, that eventually this seal will wear off. Rauru taunts the Demon King by telling him one day a hero called Link will come to stop him and he should remember that name. So the Demon King makes plans. You'll notice that in Tears of the Kingdom, when the Demon King wakes up, it's not actually the Demon King, it's just Ganondorf. Even though he was locked away in one form, he comes back in his prior form of the original Ganondorf. So what gives? What happened to his Demon King spirit? Yes, he accesses it later on in battle by using the tear, but where did it go in the meantime? Ganondorf is a man who can split his spirit into multiple entities. Throughout the series, we've seen Phantom Ganons and Puppet Ganons, Beast Form Ganons, Calamity Ganons, and all of them are separate from Ganondorf the human. He seems to be able to resurrect and come back in these various different forms, all of which he's trying to manifest himself back into reality so that he can finally rule over Hyrule. And so, around 1,000 years after the initial sealing, that Demon King spirit leaves the body of Ganondorf and becomes Demise. You can see where the tear has been removed from his head, where there is now just a cross, a gaping sort of white chasm on his face. He returns to the surface world and reawakens his moblins and armies from a chasm where they've been sleeping within the earth. So at this point, where are the Hylians? And where are the royal family? Well, after the fall of Rauru and the other sages, it is my belief that Minoru took care of their child. The child, of course, being Hylia. Hylia, as in the goddess Hylia. I don't think Hylia was truly a goddess, or again, she was a goddess with a small g. She was half Zonai, half Hylian, the last of her own kind. You see, at the very beginning of Tears of the Kingdom, Zelda refers to the fact that the Zonai were thought of as being gods themselves, or closer to the gods than any other species. I believe that's the role that Hylia has in the series, and that Hylia is the child of Rauru and Sonia. Minoru looks after her and brings about a clan of people, the Sheikah, who will be duty-bound to look after the descendants of her family for the rest of time. She is half Zonai, so she's able to live an incredibly long time, and it is she who will have to fight the Demon King and, of course, take the remaining Hyruleans into the sky and creates the community of Skyloft. She knows she must keep the Triforce away from the Demon King Demise, and Demise becomes sealed in the sealed grounds. This is the pre-story to Skyward Sword. Now, we do know that Hylia reincarnated herself as a Hylian, as Zelda, but I'm not sure that it is that straightforward. I actually think that might just be, again, one of those things that legend got a little bit wrong. Instead, given that her father was full Zonai and her mother was Hylian, she is now half Zonai, half Hylian. But of course, if she has children with another Hylian, then her children are quarter Zonai. After that, 1/8. After that, 1/16. After that, 1/32. Generations later, there is no Zonai left in the bloodline. They are just considered Hylian. And her descendant in Skyloft is the leader of Skyloft, Gabora, the headmaster of the Knights Academy, where they train knights for the obvious reason of they don't even know why they're doing it, but it's to fight against demons one day if they should ever return. Gabora is, of course, the father of Zelda, and, of course, the name Gabora ties into Gabora, the owl from Ocarina of Time, which is the sort of owl form of Rauru in that game, another descendant of this same bloodline. It actually stands to reason that in Ocarina of Time, Rauru and Zelda are probably related. I digress. The events of Skyward Sword happen, and of course at the very end of the game, Girahim goes back to a time when Demise's spirit was in fact separate from the body of Ganondorf sealed underground, and was roaming as its own entity, a commander of the Moblin army of the surface world. Of course, the Link of this game awakens the Master Sword from the Goddess Sword, likely created with the help of Minoru, who helped Hylia in creating this sword. Minoru knew about the Master Sword, she was told by Zelda. Additionally, the ability to transfer her spirit into the Purapad might have helped her in creating the sword, where Fi's spirit is put into the Master Sword. Anyway, using the newly awakened Master Sword, and of course with the power of the Triforce, Link fights against Demise, and Demise in his last moment places a curse that an incarnation of his hatred will pursue them over the generations. So, despite the fact there is the body of the original Ganondorf underground, new Ganondorfs can be born into the world, and they are all driven by this hatred, by the evil, power-hungry curse of Demise. This is where the various Legends of Zelda stories happen in the timeline. And these stories, of course, all happen over tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of years. Raru's seal keeping Ganondorf sealed away underground for all that time. But eventually Raru's seal weakens, Ganondorf becomes stronger, the Calamity happens, Breath of the Wild happens. Link, of course, fights against the Calamity Ganon, and then at the very beginning of Tears of the Kingdom, they find themselves, Link and Zelda that is, in this underground chamber, learning about this ancient war from the time of the founding of Hyrule. The story has gone full circle, much like the logo of Tears of the Kingdom, as they find themselves face to face with the original Ganondorf. What's worse is using this last remaining tear, Ganondorf is able to reawaken the Demon King spirit from within inside him. Of course, this all explains why Ganondorf in this game, he's not very two-dimensional, not like Ganondorf as he appeared in, say, Wind Waker, where he actually cares about the Gerudo people. This Ganondorf simply believes that the world should be shrouded in darkness. He reawakens himself and powers himself back up as Ganondorf the human, before using the power of the tear to reawaken the Demon King form from within inside himself. It's possible this means that the cycle of hatred will continue after Tears of the Kingdom. Or perhaps the complete destruction of Ganondorf at the end of the game means this cycle of violence is finally over. But that's just my theory and how I explain the order of events. When I put the origin story of Skyward Sword side by side with Tears of the Kingdom's founding of Hyrule flashback scenes, it was actually really hard to make a lot of these things make sense. And so to me it makes sense that actually the Demon King was born from Ganondorf, alongside the birth of all of the various moblins and demons across the world of Hyrule. And if you like this absurd Zelda theory, please consider becoming a member. It's never expected but always appreciated, and helps me in creating more absurd Zelda theories. Deep in the western highlands of Hyrule stands Satori Mountain. Covered in apple trees that sprout gold apples and cherry blossoms, this mountain, as many of you know, is home to the Lord of the Mountain, Satori. Named after legendary developer Satoru Iwata, this creature is a nature deity that has been alive since before the time of the Calamity, depicted on Sheikah runes around Hyrule Castle's sanctum. It appears to exist somewhere between the higher gods like Din, Faroe, and Nehru, and above lesser spirits like the fairies and Bloopies. Bloopies then are small rabbit-like spirits who drop rupees when shot with an arrow, and in Tears of the Kingdom they serve an even bigger role. For a full recap on the Lord of the Mountain, I recommend Zeltic's video, but the main thing I want to talk about is this. In the Hyrule Compendium, it tells us Satori is the reincarnation of an ancient sage, no longer a citizen of Hyrule, but now it is a creature that serves as a protector of nature, with various spirits working in conjunction with him. Yes, the Bloopies, as I mentioned before, but in Tears of the Kingdom, there's a new creature that's appeared, and Dr. Wily and I want to expand on this topic and dig deep into these mysterious amphibians, the Bubble Frogs.
The bubble frogs can be found in the caves that have opened up all over Hyrule as part of the upheaval. Outside each cave, a Bloopy will lead Link deep inside to encounter this creature. Much like the Bloopy dropping rupees, a single arrow is all it takes to make the bubble frog drop a bubble gem, and as it ascends, a Bloopy is freed from within. They share similar design traits to Satori and Bloopies, suggesting that they are part of the same family of spirits. Similar to how the fairies and great fairies, depending on the game, look similar. Speaking of great fairies, they, in Tears of the Kingdom, use rupees to fuel their magic in upgrading armor. This is a long-running trend in the Zelda series, with rupees being a source of magical energy, and fairies using them to enhance weapons or armor. In both Twilight Princess and The Wind Waker, the magic armor seems to run off this rupee energy, protecting Link from attacks only when Link has rupees, and expending them as time passes. If this is the case, then perhaps Bluepies are finding rupees in the world and bring them to Satori, so that he might enhance his magic. If so, this could be why he needs the Bluepies to be free of their new Bubble Frog form, so that they can continue to bring the Lord of the Mountain rupees from across the land. However, Bluepies can't do this alone. They need the help from a bow wielder like Link.
To this end, should you make an offering to a frog statue in the overworld of a golden apple found again on Satori Mountain, then Satori will appear and shine a light on nearby caves where bubble frogs are, guiding Link to help the local Bluepies find and free their friends. It's interesting to note then that this toad form that the Bluepies take, and the fact that the altars that you should offer these apples to are also frogs, can't be overlooked. These frog shrines are plentiful across the world of Hyrule, most commonly associated with the Sheikah and Yiga, who dress the frogs with their eyes. Sheikah culture goes back over 10,000 years to the beginning of Hyrule, meaning amphibian-like beings have always held some place amongst the Zelda deities. We've seen this before throughout Hyrule's history, with dragons and whales both appearing as deities across time and across the legends, but it seems also so too do frogs. In Phantom Hourglass, Sylos is a guardian of winds in the Dream World's sea. In Majora's Mask, Dongaro is the leader of a frog-croaking orchestra, and music in Zelda has always been tied to communication with the gods, whether that's like using the Windfish items or the Ocarina of Time, or of course the Baton of the Wind Waker, which summons the frog deities most similar to the bubble frogs, Zephos and Cyclos.
Zephos and Cyclos live on Dragon Roost Island, which is currently the home of the Rito, but was once the home of the Goron people when it was still Death Mountain. The island they live on has two altars, one to Zephos and one to his brother Cyclos, who, after his altar had gone uncared for, began to cause destructive cyclones across the Great Sea. These beings are the only ones in the game who appear as sub-deities alongside Valoo, the Great Deku Tree, and Jabun, but as neither is a guardian or spiritual stoneholder, they seem to be somewhat lesser, like the Queen of Great Fairies. They have a similar status as the Lord of the Mountain. Not quite a main god, but certainly a powerful being. Another comparison can be made to the Bubble Frogs, as the way to handle Cyclos is by using a bow and arrow. And the design of the Bubble Frogs and Zephos can of course not be overlooked. This and the fact that these frog statues in the world are tens of thousands of years old, with some important depictions of toads going back to Skyward Sword, suggests that creatures like this have always existed.
Kilton is a strange merchant who's obsessed with monsters, and so too is his brother Colton, who wants the bubble gems because he believes that he will become Satori if he consumes enough of the gems. Once you're done trading him these gems, he does in fact transform, but not into Satori, who was of course an ancient sage, but instead to a mere Bluepie. It's suggesting that powerful creatures like Satori must come from powerful people, and creatures like the Bubble Frogs and Bluepies, and perhaps even Cyclos and Zephos, were once other people who went through some kind of transformation, backing up the compendium entry about Satori being a powerful sage. And actually, and here's where we get into the absurd Zelda territory here, I got really speculative and was thinking about who might have transformed themselves into Cyclos and Zephos in the Wind Waker, and there actually is a species that looks kinda similar to these frogs, which are of course the Gorons, who will mostly exist in the time of Wind Waker. Their home in Ocarina of Time was Death Mountain, which in Wind Waker's age is Dragon Roost Isle, where Cyclos and Zephos live, but this is a complete side note and I can't really find too much to tie into this. The Dongaro mask was originally worn by a Goron, but I have nowhere else to go with this. Maybe you can come up with an absurd Zelda theory of your own in the comments. Still, the point stands that it seems that mortals can become immortals in the forms of these spirits and creatures in the world of Zelda. Perhaps this is also how fairies and great fairies came about, another set of kind of lesser spirits, and a connection to them can be seen in Tears of the Kingdom's magic armor. The magic armor in this game is given to you by Kilton in exchange for these bubble gems, and you can see it clearly takes design elements from Satori. It looks like the Lord of the Mountain, and much like the Lord of the Mountain himself, uses rupees to fuel its defenses, in the same way that Satori uses rupees to fuel magic. It's as if whoever designed this armor studied the creature closely. Possibly this is Cece, the fashionista of Hateno Village, who has also designed a hat that both matches the magic armor, but also takes inspiration from the great fairies around the world, who, once again, use rupees to bolster their magic. I also don't think it's a total coincidence that Cece's hat is covered in mushrooms, and what is another name for mushrooms if not a toadstool? Is it toads? So, you know, big connection there.
Toby, really, get to the point already.
The main point, of course, is this, that the power of Satori, as well as its kind of structure, having lesser spirits that work below it, as well as its ability to use rupees as magic, is not too dissimilar to the great fairies, who have fairies below them. I also fully believe that the other frog deities across the Zelda lore may well be the result of other creatures or peoples transforming, and it may go back a long time. It is also interesting to note that Satori Mountain in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom and the home of Cyclos and Zephos in Wind Waker are close to those games' respective homes for the Ritos. Now, in Wind Waker, the Rito is the Earth Sage who's the descendant of the fish, so it doesn't make a lot of sense there. But in Tears of the Kingdom, the Rito represent the elements of wind and the Sage of Wind. It's possible that in Wind Waker, the sages are all kind of mixed up as a result of the Great Flood, but once there was a Sage of Wind who lived within the Rito village, and much how like this ancient sage for Satori was potentially once the Sage of Winds, that would make sense too for Cyclos and Zephos, who have complete control over the winds and the Wind Waker. Or maybe you see a different way that all of these elements connect. The point is that much like the whales and dragons of the history of Hyrule, I look forward to learning more about the froggy mythology of the other legends of Zelda. This video goes. Let's start this absurd Zelda theory by throwing out the Zelda timeline. I've always liked the idea that Minish Cap, Four Swords, and Four Swords adventures all happen after the majority of the main continuity of Zelda. There's really not a lot in other Zelda games that tie into this trilogy. Very few references are made other than the Temple of the Four Swords, which appears in the Game Boy Advance version of Link to the Past, but I think that's just like an Easter egg. I don't think that's like canonical as a result of that version of the game coming with the Four Swords mode. Other than that, there's really not a lot to tie in with the rest of the continuity, even in Breath of the Wild, which refers to pretty much every single Zelda game. Don't get me wrong, there are the Minishi Woods and the Pico Pond, which are references to the Minish, or Picori as they're called in Hylian, and of course there's Mount Kernel, which in my opinion is the first appearance of that mountain in the continuity of Zelda. Because other than these location names, there doesn't appear to be any kind of historical reference to the Minish or the Picori. There doesn't seem to be any historical reference to Link of the past having used the Four Swords to take on the Wind Mage Vati in the same way that there's references to Twilight Princess or Wind Waker or Ocarina of Time. And I think with Tears of the Kingdom we can see this even more clearly. But first up, who are the Picori or the Minish? Well, they're a small race of mouse-like creatures with little feather tails. They come in a few different variations, and they originally came, yes, from the sky. Sounding familiar already to the Uka, or of course the Zonai, I do wonder if the Picori could somehow be descendants of Zonai. With their big, long, pointy ears, it was said in Tears of the Kingdom after all that the Zonai were no longer gracing the Hylians with their presence, perhaps by shrinking away. Anyway, that's besides the point. The Picori came from the sky and they gifted a hero of the past with a legendary sword. This sword to me looks a lot like the Master Sword, and I've already done a video on that and how I think that the Master Sword will one day become the Four Sword. In fact, the snapped blade of this sword as it appears at the beginning of Minish Cap is kind of a sort of like reflects what happens to the Four Sword in Tears of the Kingdom, but of course the sword is fully healed after that point. Who knows, maybe this is another split timeline where the sword didn't get repaired and ended up in this chest. It doesn't matter, that's besides the point. The Picori can only really be seen by children. They're also credited with being the reason why rupees appear in the grass, though we don't know if this is fact or whether this is just a little bit of myth. And they, like the Uka and like the Zonai, are said to be close to the gods. However, there is a notable character. From amongst them comes Vati, once a small Minish transformed into a powerful sorcerer by using a cap of incredible power that was originally intended to be a gift for the Hylians. As this sorcerer, he seeks out the life force, or as I believe it to be part of the Triforce, from within the Zelda of that age and transforms himself into a monster. A giant eye, but still the sorcerer and ruler of winds. He, in later iterations, has the Palace of Winds, a home from which he intends to rule all of Hyrule by taking the various maidens and princesses of the world and having absolute power. Sounds like another Ganondorf. Of course, the beast form of Ganon does make an appearance in Four Swords Adventures, but it is thought to be an entirely new Ganon from an entirely new Ganondorf, sprouting from a Gerudo tribe who knows that Ganondorf used to be a Gerudo and doesn't really like him. You find them in the Desert of Doubt and the Gerudo village. This reflects their attitude towards Ganondorf in Tears of the Kingdom pretty closely, and it's possible that this new Ganondorf comes about as a result of the destruction of the last Ganon at the end of Tears of the Kingdom. But I digress. Not only are there just not a lot of historical references to Minish Cap, Four Swords, and Four Swords Adventures in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but now with Tears of the Kingdom, when we look up to the skies and we see this architecture that's up there, a lot of the floor patterns and a lot of just the fact that there's a civilization in the sky seems to be a direct nod to the Palace of Winds and the ruins on the ground from where the Wind Tribe in Minish Cap ascended to the heavens after they mastered the winds. They did so with the help of the Minish, who I've already said could well be descendants of the Zonai, and the Zonai would know how to ascend to the winds, and possibly this is all happening as a result of Ganon, the ultimate evil, being destroyed at the end of Tears of the Kingdom. At the beginning of Tears of the Kingdom, we see the Cloud Barrier, as it's known from Skyward Sword, opening up as the heavens and the surface world become one once again. With the defeat of Ganondorf, perhaps there was no reason for the Cloud Barrier to return, so finally people could try to begin to settle and build once again in the sky. We see that in Minish Cap, the Minish also helped the Wind Tribe construct the Armos. We learn that, and the Armos are not too dissimilar from the Zonai constructs that are everywhere, but most primarily, let's just look at the main symbol of the Zonai that appears across the constructs. It's a giant eye. An eye that we ultimately know is the inspiration for the Sheikah Eye, but perhaps also the inspiration for Vati's Eye. Also, in the years since Breath of the Wild came out, we've actually learned a lot about the development of the game, and concepts that were intended to be in the game and were later removed, or later added in an altered form. We have this Link with a horrific outfit on a modern-day motorcycle, and of course, the Master Cycle did make its way into Breath of the Wild. We also had news about aliens and UFOs, which isn't unusual for Zelda. We've seen aliens in Majora's Mask before, and sure enough, the Zonai are an alien-like race. Coming from a land above the skies, they certainly are alien to the people of Hyrule. And then finally, there is that famous concept art of the Minish, as they were intended to be in Breath of the Wild. Now, obviously, they didn't make the cut, and in fact, they are barely referenced in that game. But I am to believe, I think, that they do make a return in the form of the pointy-eared Zonai, a species that, again, like the Minish, are that much closer to the gods. There are other connections between the two species as well. The Temple of Time in the Sky has this great arc-like structure which is similar to the tower where the Wind Tribe lives, and in order to access the Palace of Winds in Minish Cap, you get there by way of a dead king of Hyrule. Additionally, the guardian of the Fortress of Winds in Minish Cap is Mazal, who famously looks like Goharden, the ruler or boss, I suppose, of the Tower of the Gods from Wind Waker. Again, another connection to the winds here. Goharden is often thought to be an ancient Sheikah structure, but perhaps it is a creature more similar to Minru's golem, with spirit transferred into it from a Zonai of the past. After all, while Minru had the power of spirit and the ability to move her spirit into machinery, it's important to note that this power wasn't given to her by the secret stones. No, rather, this is a latent power that the stone merely amplifies, so it's possible that other Zonai had this power and became Goharden and Mazal. After the defeat of Ganondorf at the end of Tears of the Kingdom, I believe that there was a vacuum for power, and one of these Zonai sought to fill it. This, of course, being their descendant, the Picori or the Minish, Vati, who once got a taste of power, felt the allure, the pull, perhaps as a result of Demise's curse, or perhaps simply because there was a vacuum in the world and a space for evil to begin to spread. This sorcerer transformed himself ultimately into a creature that bears the eye of his ancestors. and he, like his forefathers, believes that he belongs not just ruling over Hyrule, but literally above it, which is why Vati's palace in the Four Swords is a floating palace in the sky. The Palace of Winds is ultimately one of the final dungeons in Minish Cap, and the Tower of Winds extends right up into the clouds. And when he transforms, he takes upon him the twisted eye of the Zonai, and more closely resembles the Zonai of old, until finally he transforms into his bestial form, the mindless monster, who wishes to be the ruler of the winds. So you're seriously telling me in The Legend of Zelda, fish people turn into bird people to escape a flood? And we're just okay with this explanation? Come on! So I know I'm a little late to the party, I'm actually very late to the party, but even Nintendo haven't got round to elaborating on this Breath of the Wild 2 trailer, and I only just started making Zelda videos here on this channel, so let's talk about them Sky Islands. Hey Hyrule heroes, Berkey Patobi here, and Sky Islands. I know the theories are already out there. We've seen Sky Islands in the world of Zelda before, right? We've seen them in Skyward Sword, that would make sense. Skyloft is a giant island in the sky. The whole game it's set in Skyloft. It's a big part of the game. Twilight Princess features the Uka, a really bizarre race of creatures that are the closest to the gods, and they live in their sky city where there's a whole temple. And if you're really niche and you know your Zelda, then you know in the Minish Cap, the Picori, were originally said to come from the sky, giving the hero of men a blade that came from the sky, and in fact, the Wind Tribe even lives in their temple above the clouds. So you already know the theories. You don't need me to come in here as a complete Zelda theory noob and tell you that these Sky Islands appeared in Wind Waker. That's right, these Sky Islands that we see in Breath of the Wild 2 appeared in my favorite Zelda title, Legend of Zelda Wind Waker. I can tell by the fact that you might already be down in the comments getting ready to go that you're maybe a little bit confused, so let's talk about these sky palaces and castles and temples, because throughout the 3 previously mentioned games that we've seen them in, they're always referring to a place that is above the earth, both physically but also metaphorically as well. In reverse order, for your ability to enter the Wind Temple in Minish Cap, you have to meet and learn about the Wind Tribe, who use their magic to elevate their palace to the clouds. And the original Picori people, they handed down this blade that was able to thwart the evil that is Vati after forging it with the 4 elements. This is a pretty special place, but it becomes more clear in Twilight Princess, where, as I mentioned, the Uka, and similarly in Twilight Princess, the Uka are thought to be beings of magic closest to the gods, closer even than the Hyruleans. And in fact, similarly, I think the Loftrings are always thought of as being closer to the gods than any other race, even the Hyruleans. They are, after all, the chosen creatures of the goddess Hylia, and this fits in perfectly with what we're seeing in Breath of the Wild 2, with these golden trees and Shinto-styled gates, which, as far as I'm aware, represent a barrier, a jump through the realm of the mortal to the realm of the sacred, closer to the gods. We also know that these sky cities are often separated from regular Hyrule by way of other magics, including the cloud barrier, which is a magical barrier that protects it from sight and allows it to remain hidden. This cloud barrier also seems to exist in Breath of the Wild, where we can see the mythical dragons Dinrol, Farosh, and Naedra disappearing up into the skies, going somewhere which we've now seen in the trailer for Breath of the Wild 2. Awesome, you were all already on that page. What the heck am I talking about when it comes to Wind Waker? Well, Wind Waker has a particular connection to Breath of the Wild, and this first came up, and I first got thinking about this when watching Master Nintendo Bandit's video on the subject of what happened to the Great Sea. Now, no matter what you think about timelines and timeline placements, there was a great flood that occurred before Breath of the Wild. I think it's pretty much assumed that all Zelda games happened before Breath of the Wild. They're all delegated to the time of legend. But throughout Hyrule, we can find the rock salts that kind of represent the fact that there was a standing body of water across the entirety of Hyrule at some point or another. That's standing water, which means, yeah, it was all flooded. But on top of that, we had also seen the Koroks, who had evolved from the Kokiri, and the Rito, who had evolved from the aquatic Zora as a result of the flooding. They evolved specifically because of the conditions met by a great giant flood that happened everywhere. And sure enough, those races exist in Breath of the Wild as well as in Wind Waker, implying that Wind Waker must have happened at some point before. No matter what you think about the timeline, I think that's pretty indisputable. But fine, okay, great, Toby, so Wind Waker happened before Breath of the Wild. Where are these Sky Islands? Okay, fine, I'll tell you. Do me a favor. Jump in the King of Red Lions, set sail across the Great Sea, and head to any island you like. Let's say Windfall. Now make your way to the highest point on that island and look up into the sky. Look out, and maybe you'll see them. Oh, hang on. I'm confused. You're looking the wrong way. Don't look up. Look down. At the island below your feet. That island is one of the many Sky Islands that is going to be appearing in Breath of the Wild 2. Okay, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Fake Zelda fan, let's get him out of here, shall we? Except, did the explanation that we get in Wind Waker really make that much sense? Hyrule was in danger by Ganon returning. The hero of time was gone into another timeline or another dimension as a result of Termina. We're not quite sure, but here's the thing. The people prayed to the goddesses, and the goddesses chose to flood Hyrule. And the people of Hyrule, their descendants, where do they flee? They flee to the mountaintops of Hyrule, and that's it. That's the explanation we're given. Except there's an island for every square mile of the Great Sea. And I've looked at the maps of Hyrule pretty closely, and the one thing that I don't see, there's not that many mountain tops. Ocarina of Time has one mountain, Four Swords Adventures, I guess one, maybe it's got a second one, I'm not sure. Minish Cap has Mount Colonel, and I think it's got another mountain on the other side, so I'm gonna give that one 2. There is not a version of Hyrule though, no matter where you look throughout the timeline, that has that many mountains. 49 mountains for 49 mountaintops. That doesn't make sense. But just look around you, open your eyes, see the conspiracy happening here, because yeah, sure, there's a mountain or two underneath the Great Sea that seem to protrude through the sea barrier, but even Ganon's tower doesn't go that high, and in the distance, mountains that are as tall, if not smaller than it. If we were truly seeing Hyrule underwater as it is with the Great Sea with all of these mountaintops, we would be seeing mountains absolutely everywhere. But that doesn't line up with what we see in every other Zelda game, and it doesn't even line up with what we're seeing underwater in the Wind Waker. So the question is, where are all these islands coming from? And the answer is simple, they're not coming from anywhere. They are where they have always been, in the skies above Hyrule. It is simply the water that has elevated to that level. Now, I'm not saying that the residents of Hyrule did not flee to the mountaintops. Clearly, Dragon Roost Island is the top of Death Mountain, and I'm sure there are other locations, perhaps the temples of the sages, the Earth and Wind Temple, that are also mountaintops. And I believe that is where people started, but then when the waters rose, they began to travel across and discover these new lands provided by the goddesses who flooded Hyrule. Think about it, it would have been a pretty cruel joke on the goddesses' part to flood Hyrule without lands for these people to travel to, and sure enough, we know that throughout the history of Hyrule there have been these floating lands protected by the goddesses. But what's a good theory without a little bit of supporting evidence? And this is where we're going to talk about those races, the Koroks and the Ritos. Because something else that's never sat right with me is the idea that the Zoras would evolve into birds as a result of the flood. And I know what you're going to say, saltwater, freshwater, river Zora, sea Zora. Except we've seen Zoras live in salt water. We see it in Termina. They're absolutely fine out there on Termina Bay. And in fact, it's the river Zoras in other games that tend to turn into something else. The Zoras wouldn't have a problem living in the Great Sea. They would actually have advantage over most of the other races, but they'd have even more of an advantage if they could fly from island to island back when they were still Sky Islands. And there's actually evidence in the Wind Waker that suggests that this is the case. I was watching Zeltic's video about Volvagia, the sort of missing elemental deity of Ocarina of Time. We see the Deku Tree for the Kokiri, we see Jabu Jabu for the Zora, but the Gorons don't really have a deity spirit. Well, they have Volvagia, but Volvagia eats them and was at one point dead but resurrected by Ganondorf. Likely the fact that it's so aggressive towards Gorons is the result of Ganondorf's curse, much like the parasites that infect Jabu Jabu and the Deku Tree. But the way that these deities tend to work in Zelda is that while they aren't special godlike beings, they still have a sort of life and death and reproduction. We see this in Ocarina of Time with the Deku Tree sapling, and then of course in the Wind Waker we're likely seeing the Great Deku Tree's sapling all grown up, or perhaps it's the Great Deku Tree's grandkid, grandsprout, grandroot. Family trees. And similarly, we see a descendant to Volvagia in the Great Velu, who not only sits atop Dragon Roost Island, but also who is directly responsible for the evolution and change of the Zora into Rito. We know that in order for a Rito to fly, they must get a feather from Velu. They need Velu's blessing. That's the kind of power that Velu has. And while I can't find a source, they say there's about a century between Ocarina of Time and the Wind Waker. That is a very quick amount of time for a fish to turn into a bird. It's a very condensed amount of time. The only way it could do that really is with the help of the gods and goddesses and various spiritual creatures. It's likely that Velu aided in the Zora's becoming the Rito. But why would Velu help the Zora and not the Gorons? We see in the Wind Waker that the Gorons are almost completely absent from Hyrule, or rather the Great Sea, with only 3 of them being around as lone merchants and their family members and relatives being far away in New Hyrule. They've almost gone completely extinct from this area of the world, I suspect as a result of some kind of feud between the Zora and the Gorons in the post-Hero of Time world. A world in which Ganon was returning, Jaboon was likely in hiding, and the Zoras saw an opportunity to be rid of the Gorons, whose architecture can be seen throughout Dragon Roost. And in fact, there in Dragon Roost, we can also see a snake-like dragon that looks a little bit closer to Volvagia than it does Velu. And it's likely in the same way that the Hyruleans appealed to the goddesses of the Zelda world, the Rito appealed to this Velu-Volvagia in-between. First traveling to this creature by way of the grapple hook and creating grapples that look a lot like Volvagia's claws to appeal to it and beg to be transformed, because they knew that while dominion over the sea would be great in the event of a flood, dominion over the skies would be useful after the flood receded, and still allowing them to travel from island to island. Of course, in the Breath of the Wild, we see Zoras too, so it seems like not all Zoras were on board with this plan, but at least some were, and they became the Rito tribe. But certainly being a bird would be a lot more useful in a time where all of our islands are floating in the sky. Of course, one day the floods did recede, leaving Hyrule covered in this salt rock-like substance, and the Sky Islands disappeared back above the cloud barriers, leaving the people of Hyrule to forget, to leave it to the time of legend. But they'll never know what we Hyrule historians know, that back, once upon a time, those islands were home to all of the people of the Great Sea of Hyrule when it had to ascend to the mountaintops and live above the waves. And you know what? That actually adds even more credence to the fact that it's called Wind Waker, and so much of the game is about the relationship to the winds and the skies and the aerial elements, as much as it is the sea. But I know, I'm new to the Zelda theorizing space. All my theories are wacky, just like the one I did about Tingle, which you should definitely check out. Tingle, absolutely a time god. I'm really enjoying doing these kind of off-the-wall Zelda theories, so